So, our show is dedicated to people who spend their time outdoors, camping, hiking, hunting, fishing, and the stories they bring back from the duck blind, deer stand, and uplands to tell at the dinner table, front porch, and fields across America. Our opening show is a little different, though. Mississippi is in the midst of its most heated race for the governor's office in recent memory, as Brandon Presley seeks to oust incumbent Tate Reeves. Because the perspective and policies of politicians directly affect the people's right and ability to enjoy time outdoors, we're going to start here. Our first guest on this inaugural episode of Standing Point, Stories from Americans Afield, is the son of a murdered father and a single mother who pulled himself out of poverty to become the youngest mayor in Nettleton, Mississippi's history in 2001 at the tender age of 23. As mayor, he gave Nettleton its first property tax decrease in history. He actually cut taxes twice and balanced the budget. Since 2008, he has served as Public Service Commissioner. His voting record and political perspective don't always sound like a typical modern-day Democrat. He's voted against utility rate increases. He is pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, has supported fiscal conservatism as a commissioner. He's made reliable and affordable broadband rural internet service a hallmark of his time as a public servant, much to the appreciation of an untold number of Mississippians. He holds the highest state office by a Democrat in Mississippi. He is a newly minted husband to the intelligent, lovely, and ebullient Caitlin Mavis Presley of Tallahatchie County. He is fed up with what he sees as corruption at the state level that only works for a portion of the population, and is today only a couple of weeks out from the election. He is Mississippi's Democratic nominee for governor, Brandon Presley. Welcome.
Hey, Cal, thank you all for having me on today. I appreciate the chance to join you.
Absolutely. Look, I know you've been busy crisscrossing the state trying to get out there and get your message out and meet everybody, so we're not going to waste any time. We're going to hop right in and try to make good use of your time.
Man, glad to be on here.
Yeah, so we're going to, I want to start off, I want to read a little excerpt, and I want you to respond to it. This is from the writer Wendell Berry's essay called In Distrust of Movements. And you and I have talked about Wendell Berry before, and I would like to see what you think about this. I've had, with my friend Wes Jackson, a number of useful conversations about the necessity of getting out of movements, even movements that have seemed necessary and dear to us when they've lapped into self-righteousness and self-betrayal, as movements seem almost invariably to do. People in movements too readily learn to deny the rights and privileges they demand for themselves to others. I think it's because they are insincere. They propose that trouble is often caused by other people. They would like to change policy but not behavior. The worst danger may be that a movement will lose its language, either to its confusion about meaning and practice or to preemption by its enemies. So my inference from that essay has always been that language has become so specialized, and because the problems that we face are routinely taken out of their full and complete context and dealt with, as the language would insinuate, piecemeal, it is inherently dangerous for an individual to get wrapped up in movements, primarily because an individual sacrifices the full spectrum of his own voice and his perspective to the myopic intent of the movement so it may progress. Having said that, I want you to explain yourself, Brandon Presley, because how can you bring nuance for the population in post-pandemic tribal 2023? A Democrat who is pro-Second Amendment and pro-life. Can you unpack that for us?
Well, one of my mentors in politics was Zell Miller, who was the governor of Georgia, was a Democrat, much of the same thinking as I am. And Zell used to say, it's not whose team you're on, it's whose side you're on. And there's a great difference in being on a team and being on a side. Mm-hmm. And I think that that really captures what Barry's trying to say. It's so easy to get caught up in losing your individualism as a part of a movement or a part of a group,
Yeah.
because it is natural to some to try to adopt the slogans, as he talks about the language
Yeah.
that is common but is not individual. And so, one of the things that I've probably been cursed with my entire life, Cal, has been fierce independence. And while I would classify myself as a Franklin Roosevelt Democrat, I think that there's a huge difference in an FDR Democrat and some of the national Democrats today that would be on the opposite side of me on Second Amendment issues, on pro-life and others. And so, somewhat one not getting caught up in a movement, and this is on the right or the left, so
Yeah,
it's not
absolutely.
just one side.
Sure.
It's easy to fall into a trap of one demonizing those on the other side of the aisle from you, and lumping everybody into one group, and feeling that their stream of thought and no matter what they say is wrong. I think, in my opinion, that is exactly what has our politics upside down in this country right now, is that lack of understanding that you can be on different teams but on the same side. Going back to what Governor Miller said,
Yeah.
there is that ability to do it. Takes a little work, takes a little effort, but it is something that I think the average person wants us to achieve. I've been asked in this campaign so many times, Brandon, if you're elected governor, you're going to have a supermajority House and a supermajority Senate that are Republicans, and you're a Democrat. How are you going to deal with that? Don't you think that's going to make your life tough? And I don't look at it that way. I look at it as the greatest opportunity, a blank canvas, to paint real good public policy for Mississippi, in which you are forced by the very nature of that legislative setup to find those sweet spots in state government where Democrats and Republicans can agree on some things. And there's an old legislative adage that don't chase those rabbits you're not going to catch. Realize that there's some things you can get done. There's some things you're not going to get done. And let's focus on the things that we can get done and not get swept up into hyper partisanship that just causes you to demonize one side over and over and over and over. And I've just never been a part of that. Look, I endorsed George W. Bush in 2004 for president and almost got ran out of the Democratic Party because of that. And I have just always been fiercely my own person. Now I'm the Democratic nominee, and I'm pro-life, I'm pro-Second Amendment, but I also believe there are some things that government can do and must do to help those that are underprivileged and that need help. And I feel like that it's better to get caught up on being on one side than being on a team.
Than being on a team. Well, so talk to me briefly about. I think about this often. Particularly when I think about politicians, is at what moment in their life, like at some point, you've got to decide. All right, I'm going to be something, and then you decided I'm going to be a Democratic politician. At some point, Tate Reeves decided, you know what, I'm going to be a Republican. Was there a moment of clarity for you? Did something happen where it clicked, or were you brought up in that and it was kind of your inheritance?
I think to a certain degree I was born a Democrat. My mother was a Democrat. My grandmother thought that when you died on your way to Jesus, you passed by Franklin Roosevelt because he brought her family out of the Depression and brought electricity to Northeast Mississippi and came up with Social Security and the New Deal. And so I think there's a tradition there. Secondly, one of the things that back to the Barry writing about movements and the whole whose side or whose team you're on, I have always found that as a Democrat in Mississippi, I have had the ultimate experience of independence where I am pro-life, pro-Second Amendment. I've been a tax cutter and have not been dictated by a party as to what to do. Number one, they probably know I'm too hard-headed to go along with any dictates from anybody. But secondly, that I've had the freedom here to be able to do my own thinking for myself, to be able to craft the public policies that I think are important without pressure of a party. And it's one of the things that I find sometimes with Republicans is that, there's an old saying, Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line. And I've never been somebody that could fall in line. And so it's I think some of it's ancestral. I think some of it's how whether you're born into a household that are Mississippi State fans or Ole Miss fans, some of it is inherent in your background. But at the same time, I do believe that had it not been for FDR's brand of hands-on approach to the nation's problems, we would have been so delayed in getting out of the Great Depression. And so it's a mix of that. I look at Lyndon Johnson passing the 64 Civil Rights Act and the 65 Voting Rights Act, those sort of things being monumental in this country. And so, while I run as a Democrat, I am a Democrat. I think it is, I'm much more out of the mold of being a Mississippi-style elected official than anything at all on the national level. I wouldn't want to touch national politics in any realm.
Man, I wouldn't either.
Well, I've been approached to run for the Senate and run for Congress, and I told them I'll trade the Tallahatchie River for the Potomac River any day of the week. I don't care anything about being up there.
I tell you what, I would too. All right, well let's talk about get into some of this. Tell me what the outdoors mean to you, but both as a personal issue, but also as an issue of public policy.
Yeah, I think that first of all, I think Mississippi is blessed with such beautiful natural beauty and natural resources that it is something that all of us, probably not you, Cal, but some of the rest of us take for granted way too much in this state, and don't take time to admire God's beauty in nature. It's one of the reasons I'm a Wendell Berry fan, like you are, is the love of the land and the love of nature. And to me, it means everything about who we are. Willie Morris, the great author, used to say it all starts with the land. Mm-hmm. And meaning that, whether it's societal differences from the Delta to the hills where I'm from, or from the coast to the piney woods, it all starts with the land, and it begins to shape our politics all the way back to the pre-Civil War days and coming forward. And so there's a great appreciation. I have a great appreciation for our outdoors, for our state parks, for our public lands. And as a public policy standpoint, I believe those public lands should remain public. I think that there are so many efforts right now for privatization, some that might have some merit. I'm not discounting all of them, but I firmly believe that public land should remain in the hands of the public that own it. And sometimes these debates get kind of nasty with some folks, and sometimes there's a push. But I believe that we should have a greater effort in Mississippi on land trusts, on preserves, and it really encouraged Mississippians to get involved in, I was going to say the movement. I shouldn't say that after what we just said, but get involved in the efforts of preservation and of appreciation of our state's natural history.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. I've got some stats I want to read to you and get your take on. But first, before we move deeper into that, I want to ask you, we've touched on the Second Amendment a little bit here. So the Second Amendment is clear that because the security of the state is what is actually at stake, the people's right to bear arms and to own and use their firearms and other types of weaponry cannot be infringed. For Mississippians, a lot of us, it's arguably the most important right enumerated. And there are people that are going to vote by that right. I know that in your past, there have been violence with firearms done against people that you loved and cared about. Well, how do those things shape your opinion on the Second Amendment? And for the hunters out here that care deeply about it, can you kind of dig into the Second Amendment a little bit and let us know, what you think, what you're likely to do as governor regarding that? Just kind of go into that for me a little bit.
Yeah, well, I have lost family members to murdered by a firearm, but I have been a strong supporter of the Second Amendment my entire career. I'm a gun owner myself. I think I mentioned to you today I was a 38 snub nose right under my glove box in my vehicle, and I believe in the right to keep and bear arms. I always have and always will, and I believe it not only as a right, but as a right of self-protection. My sister was living in a neighborhood where there were several home invasions, and she was scared to death. And I brought her home, bought her a 38 snub nose, carried her out, and showed her how to use it, how to be safe with it. And I had that for her for her own personal protection against home invasions. And I think that's a very important part of this equation. You know, here at home in Nettleton, I'm gone a lot, and Caitlin is locked and loaded, and she knows exactly where to find a firearm in the case of something were to go awry. And I think that's very important. It's hunting is definitely a part of it, but I think the greater concern of the average person is for personal protection against violence and personal protection against criminals.
Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. So in Mississippi, about 89%, or actually a little over 89% of the land in Mississippi is privately owned. Can you give us your general philosophy on private property and on land ownership?
Sure. Well, I think number one, it's central to everything that is a part of our society is that right of private ownership and of private land. One of the things that I'm proudest of in my public career has been the fight to stop eminent domain in so many cases, even at the Public Service Commission, where we would force utility companies to work with landowners to treat them fairly and treat them well. I'll give you a good example. We had a power line, a proposed power line coming from Texas all the way across Louisiana and ending up at Caledonia in Lowndes County. So it would have traversed thousands of parcels of land.
Yeah.
And the company came in to me to look for us to approve their request. And I said, I'm not going to take it up until you make a sincere effort to work with landowners. And we were able to go through, and I think this number is going to hold right, 1,400 parcels of land, and got it down to 2 or 3 landowners that were dissatisfied with the project.
Wow.
The project would not have been able to have gotten an eminent domain status because it's not a public utility. But still, that effort to work with landowners is important to me. And I try and explain to the company that, you know, this particular oak tree might not mean anything to you coming out of Garland, Texas, but it means something to a family. And if there's a way in which to work around that, you ought to do it. Prairie Wildlife, which is owned by my friend Jimmy Bryan, was in the route of that proposed line. And there were other alternate routes that were less damaging and made more sense, but yet the company sometimes was bullheaded that their route and their engineers were right and everybody else was wrong. Luckily, we were able to get that route moved to something that was way more non-intrusive to Prairie Wildlife and to the residents there. And so it's to me a use of common sense, compassion, and putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Look, I've got about 2 acres here in downtown Nettleton, and if you told me an electric transmission line was coming through our backyard, I would throw a fit. And so we have to treat others. And Wendell Berry says, treat those downstream like you treat those upstream.
That's right.
And that's something in which I think is important. The other side of that is I fought alongside Farm Bureau and others for the constitutional amendment that said private land could not be taken for private use. That to me was something in which the Supreme Court had ruled at the time that unless the state constitution spoke to the matter, then the law of the land was that a government could take private land and give it for a private use.
What was that, the Kelo case?
That's correct. And so you have the instance where I think in New Hampshire maybe is where it was, where you could take
Connecticut, New London, Connecticut.
New London, Connecticut, and take it for a shopping mall essentially because it provided economic development and the betterment of
the tax. It was going to bolster their tax revenue. Yeah,
that's right. And so Mississippi had to put it in the Constitution to make sure that that couldn't happen in Mississippi. And I went out and helped gather signatures politically supported that amendment to the Constitution to make sure that private land stayed in private hands and could only be taken for a public use or a public benefit. But that should always be used sparingly. It should not be something in which is too often a default position by those in power that immediately say, well, we'll just eminent domain you. That should be, as it usually is, a lengthy court process and something that discourages the government from taking private land, even for public use, unless it is just completely necessary. And there are cases where it is, where I think a reasonable person could say there are times when it's a highway, or maybe it is a public utility that is being looked at, or something of that nature, where the public good has to outweigh a private ownership. But it should be very rare.
Right. Okay. So, speaking about publicly held lands in Mississippi, we have 54. This is according to the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks website. We have 54 areas designated as WMAs. It constitutes 665,000 acres and over 1,000 square miles of the state in total. These are either owned directly by the state, they're operated under a memorandum of understanding between private companies and the U.S. Forestry Service, or they operate under license with the Corps of Engineers. When I sat down and started reading these numbers, I thought, good gracious, that's a tremendous resource for to be in charge of. And so what's your plan for overseeing that massive public holding that's so important to so many citizens?
Well, the governor appoints the Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks commissioners,
Mm-hmm.
which are that WMAs and others fall under. And I can assure you, my appointments will be people to that commission. Number one, that are familiar with the agency, but also familiar with the management of not only WMAs but state parks and otherwise. I think it's very important to do that. Up until now, those appointments have been highly political.
Yeah.
They have been I think, hyper political, to the point that you sometimes, and not to be critical, but just to be honest, you've got mayors of suburban towns that now sit on the Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission, suburban cities.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing against suburban cities, but I think that there are those in the state that have a deep well of knowledge on these issues that would be my type of appointments to the Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission, because it's they set the policy, they set the regulations. I think it's important that we balance not only the fact that these are public lands, it must be maintained, it must be there for the enjoyment of the public. I think we get away from that sometimes, that the real purpose of public lands are for a public purpose, and they're not somebody's little fiefdom. And to me, that starts with making sure the leadership of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks is such that is concerned with the overall wholeness of our entire system, state parks, WMAs, and other public lands under their control. And it's not just a political handout type of treat for political supporters.
So what are your thoughts? There's been a push, and most of the parks and WMAs that I saw listed were up here, kind of in North Mississippi. Kosser State Park, and I think Kyle State Park was named. There were 3 or 4 that were up this way that were under consideration for the management of them to be privatized by companies putting in bids to manage those properties. Do you think that's that kind of public-private partnership, would that have a place under your administration, or would you? How do you feel about that?
Well, I would use a scalpel and not an axe.
Yeah.
I think it would be important to look at every park is different in nature, and it's different, and no pun intended there. Mm-hmm. They're different in scope, and they're different in who is being attracted there. But I would not, my default position would not be to privatize those parks. I'm not saying that there aren't some merit in some places, again, scalpel, not an axe.
Yeah.
To look at what services could possibly be privatized, what things could be done. I'll give you a good example. Well, I was involved in this effort when some of this was put on the table. And believe it or not, the electric distribution system, the poles, the wires, the street lights within the boundaries of state parks is maintained by the state of Mississippi.
Okay.
Now, that makes absolutely no sense. So we put forward an effort for that infrastructure to be taken over by the local electric companies that were serving power up to the meter at the park, and then it was sub-metered throughout the park.
Huh.
That cost taxpayers about $2 million a year for right-of-way cleaning, pole replacement, guide wire replacement, light replacement. Those are things to me that are common sense. At Kyle State Park, it would make a heck of a lot more common sense, in my opinion, to have Tallahatchie Valley Electric Power Association be in charge of the distribution system within that park rather than taxpayers do it. And so those are things where that's not your run of the mill privatization conversation that people have, because they think about it being a type of takeover by
Yeah.
something that looks like a resort. But there are certain things, as I said, a scalpel that makes sense, that can save taxpayers money. And so I would want to start off with those low-hanging fruit that are common sense efforts that would help our park system. And then if you've got parks that are distressed, much like you have school districts that are failing, then you have a different effort. But it should be the exception and not the rule.
Yeah. Okay. So, among the issues that are cutting into the number of people hunting across the U.S., there's been a lot of attention lately in my world about there's a decrease in people hunting as a per capita slice of the population. The actual number of hunting licenses may go up, but it doesn't go up proportional to the population. So in Mississippi, generally, some of the causes for that reduction in the percentage of the population that hunts is a rise in urbanization and development of our once pristine and bucolic landscapes, and the other is an access to actual hunting land, which is interesting to me as a side note. We can touch on this a little bit, but there's an organization down in Jackson called the Sippy Girls, and and they are, I think, Ivana Williams is involved. She's a highway patrolman.
Yeah, I know Ivana.
You know Ivana, yeah. So they're working right now to get access to hunting land that is safe to introduce young girls and women to. And in talking to them, it really kind of opened my mind up about how difficult it is to get access to good hunting land.
Right.
But the other problem with that is that a lot of land, particularly like up here in DeSoto County, it's being put into subdivisions every day.
Right.
And that's in a few population centers in the state that's the case. What do you think we can do to get more children and adults involved in the outdoors, in hunting and fishing, to specifically?
I think one of the easiest things is to have a massive improvement of our state park system. One of the greatest assets we have are our beautiful state parks, which introduce many times working class children to nature and to hunting, to fishing, or the love of nature that leads them to hunting and fishing. That's one of the best starts we can have. But we need smart land use policies also in the state that make sure we're setting aside the right amount of land for public use and for hunting and for fishing and for outdoor recreation. And I don't know that we've achieved that in Mississippi. I know there have been some efforts in the legislature this last session to deal with land preservation trusts and others, but it's something that I would be attuned to simply for the preservation side of it. We are seeing, as you just pointed out, so much of our best land gobbled up, and while nobody wants to stop economic development, we've got to make sure we're balancing that in a way that preserves our land and preserves the right and the privilege and the ability of hunters and fishermen.
On that note, and this may, I don't know if this may get a little complicated, but I wonder if we could talk about annexation for a minute
Hmm.
because I'm a country person. I didn't grow up in a town. I've rarely ever lived in one. Uh, you know, I own a little land. My family owns land. None of it is located inside of a city limit. Uh, but there's always talk around communities, either when they start to grow or when they start to diminish. You know, one of the first things that a municipality seems to want to do is, oh, well, we'll just annex this group over here. That way we'll increase our tax base. Where that puts the people that live there who don't live in a city or a town because they don't want to live in a city or a town, living somewhere they don't want to live. It increases their tax, the amount of tax that they owe. And it's also, it seems to me like, because there are a handful, when a city annexes a piece of land, there's a handful, is it 10 or 12 things that they have to do within like I forget what it is, a 3 to 5 year period. And if they don't do those things, then the people who live there can go protest the fact that they were annexed. But they don't have, it's essentially taxation without representation because they don't get to vote whether or not. I mean, they can't decide whether or not they get annexed, and most of these people don't want to be, and then they are, and then they see their tax bill increase. So
Yeah,
so so
I think
what this is urban versus suburban tension, and it never goes away. But what can we do about it to make it a little more fair for the people that don't live in towns?
annexation should be hard. It should not be something that is easy, and it should not be something that that is just done on a whim. Now, I would like to look at what are the best practices in other states. Some states, as I understand it, allow for a vote of those who are going to be annexed as to whether they want to do it or not. I would certainly be open to that type of idea. I've seen myself uh, annexation. I was a mayor. I know the
Yeah.
arguments for and against it.
Mm-hmm.
Some make sense. A lot of times, annexation is done for one reason and one reason only, and that is for tax revenue.
Yeah.
Some annexation makes sense. Sometimes cities are already providing utility service, for instance, to areas within close proximity to their city limits, and therefore they can immediately provide fire protection and immediately provide police protection, and they already have the utility services there. And if it's cohesive, some of that makes sense, but it ought to be hard. It shouldn't be easy, and it shouldn't be able to just be done on a whim, because you are uh, uh, taxing people at that point, and they have no say whatsoever except through the Chancery Court route, which then becomes expensive
Yeah.
for those landowners who then are the burden is put on them to fight the annexation. There's got to be a fairer, more equitable way to deal with annexation. And I would be the type of person that says allow those folks to take a vote as to whether or not they want to be annexed or don't want to be annexed. And if you've got a community that says yes, they want to do it, then hallelujah. If you've got an area that votes against it, then you understand it. I don't see a lot of difference in annexation from a broad view and the case in Connecticut where you could take private land for private use. I
Right.
can't. There's a lot of similarities, at least in philosophy
Mm-hmm.
there, and it's stuff that I don't particularly agree with, because there still has to be the preservation of individual landowner rights, and nobody wants to come in and be taxed for a reason, no reason except for the revenue to go to a city, and you provide minimal services. Um, Too many times annexation occurs and nobody looks back to the 5-year rule as to having services provided. Now you can, as I said, you can provide police and fire immediately, but then there are other city services that should be, there should be some added benefit to those landowners to have been annexed. I'll give you an example. In Nettleton, where I live, we have people who live outside the city limits who benefit today from the fact that we have a fire rating of 5. Now, that's because Nettleton taxpayers have invested money in the fire department and all the infrastructure to have a high quality fire rating. Citizens outside in the county are benefiting from that, and Nettleton taxpayers footed the bill. Now, that's not enough to say, oh, you need to annex them. I don't
Yeah.
mean it that way, but I'm saying those are qualitative differences
Mm-hmm.
in annexation than if you had them at a fire rating of 8, where they're paying a lot more on their home insurance policy, and we could immediately give them a 5. So there are all those nuances to it.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I need you're bringing nuance to it. I mean, that's one thing that I think has been refreshing in this campaign. Even though I know it's been tight and tough, but just speaking for myself and some friends of mine that I know well enough to know how they felt about it. I think a lot of people are experiencing some fatigue from the kind of the national context of tribalism and being 180 degrees apart and nobody trying to work together. And I think it's that type of nuance that has the potential to bring people together, because people
Well,
just are people are not that opposite.
no, they're not. Everybody, is human. And I think what happens is, going back to the passage you read at the beginning of this podcast, I think so many times people talk past one another when there's a lot of areas of agreement. I told somebody that's going to be in high legislative circles the next 4 years that if I were elected governor, if we did some 4 or 5 very basic things: expand Medicaid for working people, pass a historic ethics reform package that cleans the system up, got the sales tax off of groceries, cut car tag fees in half, and fully funded public schools. If we did those 5 things, which there ought to be a working majority of consensus on, and I think we can get there. If that is all we did for 4 years, man, what a record. And you're not delving into, sometimes uh, uh, we would call it in Nettleton, dreaming up trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Just dreaming up some trouble on something. That's such a waste of energy and waste of time when the state's got serious problems and we need serious solutions to them. And that involves us not talking past one another, but talking with one another.
Right. Right. So let me ask you about this. And I think this issue blew up. I'm still learning about it, but I think this issue blew up because of the kind of stuff we're talking about right now. Uh, but a few weeks ago, this headline grabbed my attention. It said the Biden administration has taken away money that goes to states for hunter education programs. And I thought, well, that's a step in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, I've been reading about it and looking into it a little more, and some of this I think comes down to semantics. In the bill, they have the phrase "dangerous weapon," so money cannot be given to anything that has to do with a dangerous weapon in a school. Um, and so when people in states, I think this started up in Alaska, but when the people in states are looking for a program like hunter education and how to fund it. They're looking at local, state, and federal monies that are coming in, and what it looked to a lot of people in a lot of states like with this new language was that they couldn't use the money, the federal money they had been using for hunter education. They couldn't use it anymore. I think it's still maybe up in the air. You may know something I don't about it, but it may still be up in the air as far as how that's going to be interpreted. But the way that it landed in the media was once again just a straight divide. Like nobody saw it. It didn't that I saw to figure out what the actual issue was. It was just they're trying to take money away from hunter education, which I think is a terrible idea.
Of course.
So how is there a way to uncouple states from the federal government to Mississippians educating their youth on hunter education, which is basically safety? Why would we be dependent on federal funds for that anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the question. Always the answer of decoupling federal funds from state funds means you pick up the tab yourself. And if you're not taking those federal funds and you're not subject to those federal regulations for those
Mm-hmm.
for that. But it's that's something in my mind that's ridiculous, that the federal government would say. One understands there might be something in which you want in there, but hunter education should be carved out as a part of of funding. I went through hunter education myself at Nettleton School, and thank God we had it. We did it after hours, best I remember, and it was school facilities were used and others. And that, to me, that's a lurch to the left. That is too far for the average citizen out here. We should want children who are going to be hunting to know how to responsibly use a weapon, to how to responsibly hunt, and to do that in which they're not out there injuring themselves or injuring others. I mean, there's a greater, in this instance, a greater public safety need for those who are going to go hunting to protect
Certainly.
themselves and protect others out in the woods.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly. Um, so carrying right through with hunting, we killed and reported 270,000 deer in Mississippi last year.
Wow.
That's out of a herd that's estimated to be 1.5 million. I'm from Tallahatchie County. Clearly, I think I can say this with some confidence. There were more deer killed than reported. Okay.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So, uh, I think the number is probably somewhere between 20 and 25%. That Mississippians killed 20 to 25% of our deer herd last year. And the last word we got from the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks was them asking us all to completely fill our tags this year and kill more deer, because even killing, an estimated quarter, well, not quite a quarter, or close to a quarter of the population, it wasn't enough. And the hunter is the last line of defense against the horror of overpopulation, of
Right.
these animals and others. So I think there's a lot of enjoyment for Mississippians out in the field and out in the marshes. I think there's, I operate a quail hunting preserve. We've had people from all over the globe come hunt with us. We've had people from all over the United States come hunt with us. Not much is done for quail habitat and for bringing people to hunt quail in Mississippi outside of what we do privately. But do you have a plan for managing our outdoor resources in a way that balances the need of native Mississippians while also increasing tourism dollars by bringing people in to quail hunt, duck hunt, deer hunt, etc.? Fish,
Well, yeah, I think it all starts with making sure your appointments to the agency that's making these regulations, um, that's making these rules, are ones that, number one, don't substitute their judgment for the judgment of the experts who are not playing politics with wildlife or management of wildlife. And to me, that's where the governor has the most direct role outside of just pure legislative um, action or vetoes or those sort of things. That's where
Mm-hmm.
the governor can play a role.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Look, I got two more questions for you, and then I'm going to
All right.
let you get back to it. This first one. What are you most looking forward to about being governor, and what worries you the most, and what are you most optimistic about?
Well, I guess the thing I'm looking most forward to is being able to help the most people. The great thing about public service, no matter where you're serving, is that job allows you to help others in a way in which, quite frankly, it's hard to do in many other professions. So you have a greater opportunity in public life to help your fellow man, help your fellow woman, get things done and improve their quality of life, and find ways in which to do that are sometimes outside the norm, and to really help restore dignity to people. And so I'm excited about that. The complications are what they are. We live in a very tribalized, uh, polarized political world these days, and so there are definitely those pressures out there. So I think it's going to take extra work to make sure that you're tamping down the the politics and the partisanship to actually get some things done. But as I said earlier, I don't view that as some monster that has to be slayed as much as it's an opportunity to really put a skill set to work by all parties where you're focused on results, accomplishments, and not just focused on who's getting the political win of the day or who's getting the cutest remark in the paper or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. And so I just read right before I left the house. I had not seen this before, but I read where our current governor Tate Reeves equivocated you and Gavin Newsom of California when he said that he would debate him on guns on his next trip to Mississippi to support you. And you don't have to have a degree in English to read what he's saying, to understand what he's saying there. So listening to you, you don't sound anything like Gavin Newsom.
Look,
So
I've never met Gavin Newsom and don't want to.
okay.
This is the type of that quote and that little press release that Tate Reeves put out earlier in the year is indicative of the cheapness of politics. I've never met, as I said, never met Gavin Newsom, have no interest in meeting him, and he sure is hell didn't come to Mississippi to politic for me. I would have sent him packing. But the truth is that's the type of insult to the intelligence of the people of Mississippi that politicians want to play. There's always somebody's going to come get you. There's always something that is out there hiding in a bush to come and get you. And if these politicians can scare you enough, then they can get you to vote for them. But if it's a situation where you're thinking and you realize that everything is not just one way, and every a broken clock is right 2 times a day, you can begin to see that things may be not as they always politically seem. And so, I saw that and just sort of laughed. I challenged the governor to 5 debates, and he chickened out of 4 of them and won. So he wants to debate me. He wants to debate Gavin Newsom more than he wants to debate the guy that's running against him.
Yeah. So are y'all going to have a debate then?
We will. It will actually be Wednesday night, November the 1st from 7 to 8. It'll be broadcast on Mississippi Public Broadcasting. And
good.
So that'll be it. Yeah.
Yeah. So my second part to that is, and you may have kind of just answered it, but I was gonna, how do you get Mississippians to understand with that kind of messaging out there that you're not I think most Mississippians, and judging from your tone just then, I think you probably do too, you can consider Gavin Newsom a far left radical.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So how do you get Mississippians to understand that even though, that's kind of what the national, the perspective of us from a national viewpoint is that people like him are radical. How do you get people in Mississippi to understand that that's not you?
Well, it takes a lot of work, and I think that as I go around the state and we have introduced BrandonPresley to the people of Mississippi, look, there are no far left radicals in Nettleton, Mississippi.
Yeah.
Town population of 1,906, and I'm standing here right now in downtown. There aren't any, and I think for a lot of the people in Mississippi, they realize too that they're being played for a fool.
Yeah.
And I think that's insulting to their intelligence.
Okay. Well, look, that's all we have. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or any questions you have?
That's it. Listen, Cal, thank you so much for letting me be on here with you, and I appreciate more than you know that, and it's just an honor to have the chance to come on your podcast.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you so much, and good luck in the election.
Hey, thank you, my friend. Good to talk with you.
You too. This episode is brought to you by OLR Realty in Oxford, Mississippi. You can go check them out at www.olragency.com, as well as a generous gift from Mr. Kit Bryant, and by a kind gift from Mr. Houston Stewart. Thank you.